Rainsbone, and of course I come every summer. I'm not absolutely new, but I'm glad to be here. I'm from Des Moines.
Welcome. Anyone else? And I just got a signal from Jim Black that we are now live, so it's working. Thanks, Jim. Today we are joined by Dr. Tom Davis. Tom has been president or chief academic officer of 5 tribal colleges and universities throughout the country. And as a member of the tribal college movement, he helped found the World Indigenous Nations Higher Education Consortium, and is an active of STEM, an acronym for science, technology, engineering, and math education to generate economic development opportunities for poorer communities. Together with Dr. Verna Fowler, Tom helped found the College of the Menominee Nation, one of only 3 land-grant colleges in the state of Wisconsin. And on top of all of that, he's an active novelist and poet, and a regular attendee and participant in our very own Dickinson Poetry Series. He's a year-round resident of Door County and a valued friend of our fellowship. And by the way, Tom has agreed to remain with us, beginning at around 11:05, depending on how long the service goes, for our traditional talk back session. And those watching online are invited to join the talk back via Zoom, be presented right here on the large screen. And typically our talk backs take about 20 minutes or so, or we allow about 20 minutes for them. So this time, announcements. I'd like to invite anybody who has an announcement to share them with the fellowship. And once again, Buttons will bring you the mic, raise your hand, and you can make the announcement that you wish to make. So any announcements at all? Yes.
Lynn Lees. I'm representing the 25th Anniversary Committee and encourage you all for this quarter to please contribute to UFDC for help of Door County, a group close to our hearts doing such good work for women, children, and anybody in a stressful condition. So please open your wallets and hearts.
And just a reminder, we collected in the first 2 quarters gave $7,500 each to 2 organizations, Boys and Girls Club and Food Pantry Coalition of Door County. And remember, it's if we collect $2,500, then we kick in the matching grant of $2,500, get you to $5,000, and whatever above that is additive to it. And I think we're pretty close to getting that kick in on the matching grant, so that's a good thing indeed. Any other announcements? I will now light the chalice. With these words, with a war in Ukraine, a pandemic not ended, and mass shootings now the norm, it's good to remember the words of Albert Einstein. The world is a dangerous place to live, not because of the people who are evil, but because of the people who don't do anything about it. Please stand if able and willing, and join me in the unison affirmation, following which we will hum, and as Sarah said, with summer holiday joy, the doxology. We gather together to seek knowledge and wisdom, to explore freely the vast reaches of mind and spirit, to celebrate in the caring community those truths, ancient and modern, which give meaning and direction to our lives. We now get to joys and concerns. Joy can lift the heart. Concern can weigh it down. Sharing with a community of friends can raise the joy to greater heights or provide balm, lessen the weighty burden of concern. If you have a joy or concern you'd like to share, we invite you to share it. Be mindful of the fact that we're on the World Wide Web. And so if you're going to mention anybody or whatever that might be sensitive, be mindful of that. Do we have any joys or concerns? Please, sir.
I had to make a few notes. CNN this morning. Boulder, 10. Parkland, 17. Las Vegas, 60. Aurora, 12. Sandy Hook, 26. San Bernardino, 14. Midland, Odessa, 7. Sutherland Springs, 26. Tree of Life, 11. 173. That's just a partial list. It doesn't include the wounded and traumatized. Saw a story this week that one of the people who was wounded in the Austin clock tower shooting, way back in 63 or 64, she died 38 years later of her wounds. Wall Street held a moment of silence. So generous of them. And then Fortune magazine reported shares of Sturm Ruger rose 5.8%. Smith & Wesson rose 10%. The political and corporate culture of this country will not change anything. I think one of the few remaining places where there's possibility of change is spiritual communities. Supreme Court will be coming out with a decision in the coming weeks, rolling back what few firearms regulations there are. There's a concept in Native American and other indigenous cultures. In North America, it's called Wetiko. And it's thought of as kind of like a spiritual virus that is contagious. The easiest way to understand it is it's about consumption, overconsumption, and finally, it's eating oneself, consuming cannibalism. For those who might be interested, I worked as a political cartoonist years ago. I'm taking out an ad in the Peninsula Pulse this coming week with a cartoon that I ran over and over every time there was a major mass shooting. And I haven't come up with the full wording that I'm going to have going along with the cartoon. But if you see it and you agree with it, feel free to pass it along or use it in whatever way you wish. Thank you.
So taking a moment just to absorb that, but also to add a joy that I have. Yesterday morning, I was at Fish Creek Sunset Park at sunrise. That was the site of the start of the Creation Water Walk that's going on this weekend. Because of my 2 foot surgeries this winter, I wasn't able to walk, but I was able to be there with them at sunrise. And then after sunrise, there was a ceremony that was just very special and positive. And I think we're probably at the point that only spirit and magic and things like that are gonna save us. And I guess I'm praying for the folks that are walking today, and I'm praying for our waters, and I'm praying for our healing.
Thank you. We have several buttons.
On a more joyful note, next week we'll have the opening in the gallery of work by Dan Cross based on his visit to the Anasazi ruin at Chaco Canyon way back 35 years ago. Altered Photography, you probably know his work. He's also the owner of the Idea Gallery. So please take a look.
Why don't you go ahead and share as well that he was once a student of yours?
Yes. And a very good painter.
Also on a lighter note, yesterday I witnessed a new resident of my neighborhood. A young fawn was born under my apple tree. And I saw almost the whole thing, and as Mama got through feeding her, she just casually walked away and the little doe followed her, just at the most beautiful pace. And I thought, if it could be so for humans.
I'm Barb Campbell. I have just returned from New Haven, Connecticut, where my youngest, 2 years late because it was COVID delayed, received her PhD. And I'm intensely proud of her. She's now an assistant professor at the University of Alaska Fairbanks in their College of Fisheries and Marine Science. But I'm especially proud of the fact that she has acquired a number of grants to fund Native American students, not just Alaskan Natives, but Indigenous students, to encourage them in STEM, and she's worked out the funding to be able to provide the stipend that so often inhibits students of color and from being able to continue their graduate work. So I'm really proud of her for doing that, and relieved that that whole process is finally done.
Nice to know as well that in the School of Fisheries, all our grades are above sea level.
Well, I'm batching it up here for a couple of weeks. That's not my joy. Well, it kind of is. But at any rate, Wilma is visiting, spending 2 weeks with her sister and her family in Canada. The first time, Wilma and her sister Harma talk every day on the phone, and it's the first time they've been able to be together in 3 years. So they're having a great time.
Neat.
This is along Dottie's lines. When I hear reports like yours and read the papers and watch TV, I need to be out in nature. And we're blessed to live across from Cherry Hills Golf Course, and we've been inundated with trilliums this year, as I'm sure all of you have. And then yesterday, my husband said, "Look, a yellow lady slipper." And those are the kinds of things that keep me going and to make me feel so blessed to live in this gorgeous place that we call Door County.
Thank you. Excuse me. We rely on your generosity of spirit and shekel. As the offering plate passes before you, please give generously. break now from the ongoing assault on our senses. Let us take this moment of quiet to ponder and reflect, each through our own thoughts. When I read the title and synopsis of our guest speaker's planned remarks for today, I was struck by the line, quote, "As the earth faces an ever-increasing array of challenges, with humankind separated from the natural world as the twin ideas of bigness and the importance of greed and choice at the center of American decision-making, Native American communities have a lot to say about the culture and values that are important to rediscover if balance, another central tribal idea, is to be brought back to earth." Now, I'm not a student of Native American studies, and so I eagerly await Tom's remarks. But I do consider myself a student of the poets, and Tom's remarks reminded me of the concern about bigness and greed and balance and earth William Wordsworth made in a poem called "The World is Too Much With Us, Late and Soon," a poem published over 215 years ago in 1807, but perhaps even more relevant today than then. The world is too much with us, late and soon, getting and spending. We lay waste our powers. Little we see in nature that is ours. We have given our hearts away, a sordid boon. The sea that bears her bosom to the moon, the winds that will be howling at all hours, and are upgathered now like sleeping flowers. For this, for everything, we are out of tune. It moves us not. Great God, I'd rather be a pagan suckled in a crate outworn. So might I, standing on this pleasant lea, have glimpses that would make me less forlorn. Have sight of Proteus rising from the sea, or hear old Triton blow his wreathed horn. Drawing on his extensive background in working with and on behalf of Native American and indigenous peoples, Tom will now offer his remarks entitled "Walking in Beauty, the Heart of the Navajo."
Good morning.
Good morning.
I wanted to start just briefly talking about the tribal colleges and universities in the United States. There's 38 now. And they were founded out of a profound period in American history where the United States government, particularly the United States Army and the United States Congress, tried to eliminate the language, the culture, the spirituality, and the essence of what the various Native American tribes believed they were to be in the United States. And the tribal colleges were a reaction to that, and an effort to change the history that was pretty tragic and pretty sad, particularly education within American history, which had grown at the time, we're talking in the early 70s now, when I first began my career. Pretty sad. I mean, dropout rates were horrendous. the Native American students just simply weren't doing at any level of education, doing well at any education at all. And I want to start with Flagstaff and a little story. At the time I was the president of this particular story, I was the president at Lakota Ojibwe Community College in Hayward, or up by Hayward, I should say. It's outside of Hayward, but on the reservation. And we had all gathered in Flagstaff, Arizona. Beautiful place. And Tommy Lewis, who was the president of Diné College, which is one of two tribal colleges on the Navajo reservation, one in the evening after we'd all gathered at the hotel that we were going to meet at, told me, Tom, I want you to get up tomorrow morning and we're going to go up the mountains. I asked him, well, what time? And he said, well, about 3 a.m. I sighed, I suspect, pretty deeply, and I said, okay, Tommy, I'll be up at 3 a.m. and I'll meet you in the parking lot the way you want me to. And when I got up at that awful hour in the morning, got down to the parking lot, it was pretty cold. We're talking Flagstaff. We're not talking Crown Point, where Navajo Technical University is located. And there were several of the tribal college presidents there. I'd say probably about of the 32 colleges that existed at that point in time, about half, maybe 15, 16, 17 of the tribal collegemen together. And there was a medicine man there that Tommy had brought along. And we drove up into the San Francisco mountain peaks. And we headed toward a particular peak. It's Abalone Shell Mountain in Navajo. I'm not going to try to say the Navajo word. That's pretty complex. It's one of 4 Navajo peaks that are sacred. And Abalone Shell Mountain is usually associated with color. It's the westernmost of the 4 peaks. And the creation story, the Dede Bahani, says that the Navajo came out of the ground not too far from Farmington, New Mexico, not too far from Navajo Lake up there. And the great creator, or the creator, placed the Navajo in the center of the 4 peaks and told them that this was their land. And so we drove quite a way to get to this particular mountain that morning. Got out of the car and or the vans, and it was pretty dark, couldn't see anything. There had been some clouds in the sky the night before. They were breaking up a little bit, but we couldn't see the moon particularly. And then the medicine man in front and the rest of us trailing behind walked this long, winding trail in the darkness up this sacred mountain. And finally, we were pretty high at that point. The medicine man and Tommy and the other tribal college presidents stopped in a meadow. It was getting a little bit of light, but the sun hadn't risen yet. And it was absolutely beautiful up there. The aspen trees were beginning to flower with their leaves, because you had pines up there in a forest. And as we were put into a circle, a full circle, the medicine man began to speak in Navajo and to perform a ceremony. And after just a few of his words, the sun started to rise and peek over the mountains and throw light into the aspen leaves. But at that exact moment, we heard the elk bugling far in the distance. And I can't even tell you what awe and beauty swept over us in that moment. And later on, not too far distant from that moment, the medicine man took a bag of corn pollen, had us hold out our hands, and he gave us each a little pinch of corn pollen, which then we were directed in Navajo to spread out on Mother Earth, the sacred mother that gave life to all life upon the planet. But I want to go on there and tell you yet another story. And in this story, Ethel and I were living in Continental Divide, New Mexico, as provost at Navajo Technical College. Wasn't yet a university. We hadn't turned it into a university yet. And suddenly I had some signs that I had some problems, health problems. And at the college, Elmer Guy, the president, heard about it. I told him I was going to have to go to the doctor and all that sort of thing. And Elmer looked at me a moment and he said, we're going to go see Raymond Redhouse. Now, Raymond Redhouse is another medicine man. He's known as the crystal holder of the Navajo, which means that he's that powerful a medicine man that exists within Navajo. And he said, tomorrow morning, didn't give me any choice, of course, that's what we were going to do. We were going to go see Raymond in a place called Tisnos Ponce, which is located right at the Four Corners, where New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, and Arizona join. It's a very sacred place for the Navajo. And we got up in the morning, and I got up the next morning, got in the car with Elmer after I drove to the college. Always had to drive about just a little over an hour to work there. And we drove to Tisnos Ponce, which is several hours away, up into the hill. And I was led into Hogan. Hogan is home under the Navajo language. And in that Hogan, which of course is earthen with some logs, I sat down and Raymond began a healing ceremony for me. Now, I don't know how many of you have the patience to sit through a healing ceremony. They go on for hours and hours. And of course, the great medicine men of the Navajo and of so many other tribes spend 7 years in apprenticeship for every ceremony they master. 7 years, imagine that. I mean, you can get a PhD in this country in a lot less time. They have to do that for every ceremony. And because they speak Navajo, they have to learn every movement that they make. It has symbolic significance. They have to learn the songs that they sing. Of course, they have to learn the chants that they use. And it's a profound experience if you've ever gone through one of those. Only Elmer Guy and the crystal, which has been handed down, according to Raymond anyway, over thousands of years from medicine to man to medicine man, is huge. The crystal is set in the center, and you listen to this soft voice, man. Raymond doesn't have a big voice like I have. Go on for hours and hours and hours. And after all of that was over, he gave me this root and sent me home and said I had to make a she with it every day. He said that he had spent a couple of days finding the root in the hills around T. Snow's Falls, harvested it and come back. And now I had to do that. I did. And later on I had bladder cancer. But he told me as I left, he said, "You're sick. You're going to be okay." Of course, I'm standing here today, so he must have been right. Even though going through that isn't too pleasant. But the Navajos still believe in those healing ceremonies. They also think you ought to go to the doctor. But boy, I had no choice but to go see Raymond, because I knew him really well at that time. And the last little story I want to tell about is Walt Disney. I don't know if any of you knew him. He's Red Lake tribal member. He's gone now. He died way too young. But Ethel and I I had founded College of the Menominee Nation at that point, and we were going to have a writers' conference. We were going to start the process of really creating an actual college, which was a big deal to us. And we brought some of the most important Native American writers in the country at the time into Menominee. We had this conference, and we read poetry and prose and everything. But Walt Disney was there. And he told a story at that point in time that later, when I was in Washington, D.C., meeting with the Assistant Secretary of Education for the United States of America in this sumptuous office that was way at the top of the education building in D.C. We were working on legislation that the department was trying to decide whether they were going to support for the tribal colleges or not at the time. And I was supposed to represent that along with Veronica Gonzalez, who was then the head of AHEC, the American Indian Higher Education Consortium. And this guy was really giving me a hard time, this three-piece suit type guy, nice tie and everything. And so I finally got tired of it, and I put my hands up like that. I said, "Wait. I got to tell you something." I said, "It's early spring in the northern woods of Wisconsin, up by Lake Superior." And I said, "It's still cold. And the swamps up there, big woods." And I said, "You know what's happening now?" I said, "There's these old men, Anishinaabe men. They're going alone without telling anybody that they're going out into the woods. And they have hand drums with them. And they're going at night on a night of the full moon. And out there alone in the woods. in the cold. They're singing and they're dancing to bring balance to the world. I'm just telling that simple story from Walt Disney. The Department of Education eventually supported the legislation that we were trying to get through. And it's one of the things that helped solidify the existence of the tribal colleges and universities in the United States. And I tell these stories because I think they give some sense of the power that indigenous people from all over the world, and I know indigenous people from Australia, New Zealand, and Taiwan, and other parts of the universe, including Sweden and Norway. The power that is in their spirits and their hearts. And I think a lot of us probably could listen to. Most of these communities are troubled. I mean, in Navajo, there's many, many people that worked at the university that had no water at home. They had to haul water every day, if you can imagine that, in 21st century America. They had to bathe a little bit by hand. They couldn't pour it in a tub. It was too precious. It was expensive because you had to go to little communities like LaRue or Grants, and you had to pay to get the water from a spout. And they had all these different kinds of containers that they put in their trucks, but it was expensive. They had to pay for gas. They often didn't have money. They had problems, but still, there's also power there. And one of the things that Walt told Ethel and I when he was telling us about the old men up in Red Cliff going out into the woods and the swamps up there to drum and sing balance in the world, he said, yeah, the Europeans have a lot of power, but one of these days, they're going to have to come back to the Indian, he said. And they're going to have to use the wisdom still inherent in the Indians to bring balance back to the world. And of course, central to Indian thought today is the idea of sovereignty. The United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 8 states that Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with Indian tribes. And that creates a sovereignty, and it's real controversial in this country. I know that Donald Trump was determined to end it as a concept within the United States. So that's really a primacy. And it's a primacy because the tribes and the native people want to maintain their language, their culture, their heritage. And they want that maintenance to be on their terms, not the terms of the state of Wisconsin. I mean, the fishing controversy in Wisconsin that was so powerful up north that Walt drugged me into somewhat kicking and screaming in those days and all of that. But inherent in all of the idea of sovereignty, the ability to make your own decisions, which of course the tribal colleges are all about, right? The ability to fashion education in your way, the Indian way, rather than the white man's way. But throughout all that, they want to maintain who they are, the resiliency at the heart of who they are, who they perceive they are. And they've maintained that through the long walk after Kit Carson burned all of the orchards of the Navajo and killed all of the sheep flocks of the Navajo before sending them on a long walk where people were actually captured and made slaves. We have record of all this. It's a historical fact. People died through starvation and exhaustion. They maintained that through the long walk. And the long walk back, where they saw the mountain, the great mountain where Ethel and I live, is Mount Taylor, which of course is Turquoise Mountain in Navajo. And seeing that as they came back to their reservation and everything. They maintained that through the boarding schools, even though the U.S. government and churches, so many churches participated in trying to end Indian language, tried to end the practice of Indian culture and the dances and the singing and everything that the individual tribes believed in their spirit of spirit that they were as a people. They maintained all of that. Throughout all of this, the tribes have maintained and fought to hold on what is theirs, their spirituality, their language, their culture, their heritage, everything that they believe they are. Of course, they've translated it into contemporary circumstances to deal with those circumstances. However they might be, it's really an inspiring and a beautiful story. I mean, we founded the World Indigenous Nations Higher Education Consortium in Kananaskis, Canada, on the Nakota First Nation up there. And we gathered educators from all over the world, indigenous people. And if you can imagine the Colorado Rockies with their wonderful granite peaks, with the trees just sort of tumbling down almost like a stream tumbles down into a blue lake. And in a great field, there were all these startlingly white teepees constructed. We had the meetings there within those white teepees. It wasn't a hotel that we stayed in. We stayed in the teepees. Did ceremonies from the Maori over in New Zealand, the Aborigine in Australia, the Sami from Norway. We created this organization, and it's part of it. And I want to read a poem, if I may. Or Hank has already read one, but I'm going to read another one. Hopefully it's a short one, if I can. And I'm reading it for a specific purpose, of course, trying to give you some sense of how Indian people approach the contemporary world. Red Pines. Larry Anderson gathered us. He went through offices and cubicles, telling everyone we were going to have a ceremony in the red pines to be harvested, so we could continue building the Thunderbird shape that housed the college. 15 people joined the circle Dan Jones had us form. We stood in mid-morning sunlight in front of the medicine wheel between the Center of Excellence double-wide trailer. And the Thunderbird's north wing was Dan, dark, genial, pipe carrier, asked Larry for the bird basket of fruit. I will not speak the words Dan spoke, He accepted and burned tobacco in the traditional way. He asked the pines for forgiveness. He talked about how we were right in celebrating trees and mourning the need that caused us to end such long-lived lives. He asked the trees to bless the lives of students that would learn in the new building. The sun was hot. Dan said his words, teaching us the proper attitude toward ourselves. The tall, slender pine. Then we each ate a raspberry, blueberry, blackberry, or strawberry as a birch bark basket went around until one kind of fruit was left. The birch bark basket and fruit were placed beneath high branches of red pine. Then we went back inside the college to work. I went away the next morning to Canada, and a gathering of white teepees gleaming in a meadow surrounded with dark pine, spruce, and white-trunked aspen. When I returned, the red pine and the roped-off plot behind the college, extending out from the Thunderbird's north wing, had been cut. Even the stumps were gone. I looked at the emptiness and said nothing. This has been a difficult week in this country. I mean, in U of 8, as we all know, 19 children and 2 teachers were murdered. I don't think we should forget that every day 321 people in the United States are shot with guns. 111 of those people are shot and killed. 210 survived with injuries from the gun. It's been a difficult week. But I talked just a moment ago about how Navajo and other tribes, in spite of extremely difficult and tragic and awful circumstances, as our people, for the most part, here tried to end their culture and language and spirituality and who they conceive themselves to be. Threatened their very existence, and in some case succeeded, because there were tribes that went extinct totally during that process, including the Noquay, which once lived here in Door County. They survived all of that. But today, one of the hearts of the spirit of the Navajo is simple to listen to. It is walk in beauty. Within you, within everyone, all over this planet. And of course, without. The trees, the mountains, the lakes, the streams, the animals that to the native people you pray to. And I wanted to read something from a friend of mine, Dr. Henrietta Mann, as I work to the end of this. Henrietta is, in her language, Northern Cheyenne, the prayer cloth woman. She is just a wonderful, wonderful human being. Remember, water is life. You are water, related to the rain, streams, rivers, and oceans. Remember, sun is light and warmth. You carry the fire from the sun within. And you are related to the sun and the sacred fire of your ceremonies, which you are going through this morning. Remember, air is the breath of life. You carry this sacred breath of life in your lungs that are related to the winds that blow from the four directions. Remember, earth is your home. There is no place else for you to live. You are earth. And so I say unto you this morning, a prayer, an admonition, a contemplation as you leave this place today. Walk in beauty. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. The tribal nation certainly had a great friend in you. And now we extinguish the chalice with these words. As we perhaps already have, or soon will, celebrate the holiday weekend with beers and brats and parades and lemonades, let us not forget that it's called Memorial Day. Find the time to thank all of those whom we honor on this day, folks just like you and me, men and women, who, whether we agree or not with the particulars, served and died when called upon to protect our way of life. Remember them, honor them. Let me suggest that we do the talk back at 11:15. That'll give us a chance to get a cup of coffee if you'd like or whatever. And that'll also give Jim a chance to set it up. Thank you.
Something.
I think we